Okay, today's tutorial is going to be on normal maps. And what normal maps are there a way to take the detail modeling that you get from Mudbox and project that detail modeling onto a simple model like this in Maya. So the reason that to use normal maps is because Mudbox and ZBrush are both sculpting programs, and since they're sculpting specific, you can have models that have above 1,000,000 polygons, and the computer can handle it, and you can sculpt and get a lot of detail here. But then you want to bring it back into Maya, because Maya is kind of the the bigger program, so it can do rendering and all the other texturing, all this. Sorry, you just kind of render out your scene, sorry, all the way through the whole thing. And since Maya runs more advanced rendering, it is kind of limited to not being able to have a model that can handle 1,000,000 polys. So we need to have the models have somewhere in that 10K to 50K kind of range. And so this is going to be a display of how to do that process right here. So I'm going to do something pretty simple here, just because I want to focus on the process of getting the normal maps on and some of the basics of sculpting here in Mudbox. So I have this horn that I made in Maya, and I did this by creating a cone shape, and then I think I used deform nonlinear twist right here to kind of add some of this twist that you see in this horn right here. So that's the reason that my horn has like a little bit of a twist to it right there. So I'm going to select this model in objects mode, get object mode by right clicking, go to object mode here. And Mudbox is another Autodesk program, meaning it's made by the same company as Maya. So they kind of work nicely together, or they cooperate, I should say. So if I select this model, I can send this to Mudbox pretty easily. But before you send this, make sure that it's UV'd, right? So if your object is not UV'd, go back to one of my previous tutorials and UV it, because the process is not going to work at all unless it's UV'd here. So object selected is UV'd. I'm going to go to File, Send to Mudbox, and I'm going to send this as a new scene here. And sorry, the one reason I'm thinking here, yeah, I think that's a good amount of subdivisions. I want to make sure that this model is like pretty good before I send it over, and I think that subdivision count's going to be okay for this. I was considering smoothing it. One thing I should say is that if you have your model here and it's UV'd, and you're thinking to myself, let me pull up my UV window right here. So you can see the UVs look okay. This checkerboard, I press the blue and red, they're blue, so that's good. These are some nice UVs I have here. If you're looking at this and you're thinking, I would rather have this thing be smoothed, I can press smooth right here, which is this button right here, double my geometry, and the UVs still work. Okay, so you're not, if you decide that you want to smooth your model here, and you've already UV'd it, that's totally okay here. So this will actually probably yield some slightly better results, but I'm going to go to Edit Undo and go back to this original model right here, because again, I kind of want to show off that like normal maps can get a lot of this detail that we're about to get into the model back into a simple model here. So we have our model. I'm going to go back to modeling standard, get out of UV mode. Oops. And I'm going to send this to Mudbox. So select the object here, go to File, Send to Mudbox, Send as a new scene right there. So I'll click that. Notice that I already have Mudbox open. So I opened Mudbox ahead of time. I think it runs a little smoother when you do this. You can see it's thinking right there. And I'll open Mudbox here, and you can see the horn comes in. If I press W, that's a shortcut to get the wireframe on it. So you can see that the wireframe shows up. Since this model was UV correctly, I don't get any error messages showing up when this was brought in. There's some error messages that are more serious than others. So just kind of keep that in mind. Most of the time you can kind of work through them. So let's go over this window a little bit here. So we have the sculpt tools right here. I'm going to be using this, just limiting my use here for this demo for sculpt, smooth, and I'll use the wax tool here. and we'll kind of go over those more down the road. In this area down here, these are kind of some additional helpful things here. The only one of these that we're going to worry about is I'll show some stamps briefly here. So we'll kind of go over what stamps are, and then also mention what material presets are. So material presets are, you can see we can change the material here on our object. And one important thing to note here is these are just preview materials, meaning that it doesn't really matter what you change the material to here. It's not going to come back over into Maya when you send it over. It's just previews for how you see it, how you want to see it when you're sculpting in Mudbox. So let's move to this window right here where my cursor is. So if I double click on any of these tools, you can see these are brushes here. So the size, the strength, and the stamp for each of these brushes kind of shows up in this area right here. So if you don't see this, if it's still blank, just make sure you're double clicking on the tool to get it to show up. Looking at this area over here, we have 3 tabs, and right now we're not going to really talk about viewport filters here. We have the object list, which is like the outliner in Maya. So this is just showing all the objects that are in our scene. We have the cameras, we have the default light, we have the default materials, then we have our horn here. And you can see when I select it, it turns yellow. And next to the horn, there's a little plus button. And so what that shows are the subdivision levels. And so the subdivision levels are probably like the most important thing to understand about Mudbox. So we'll be going over that in a second, but just make a mental note of that. So you see how it turns yellow when I have it selected. If you want it to not be yellow, just click on Lambert and then it'll turn off. Also press W to turn off the wireframe here. Okay, I can press W to turn off the wireframe there. So let's go up to Layers tab. So the Layers tab right here, we have Sculpt and we have Paint. So there's kind of 2 main modes that you can work on in Mudbox. We're not painting right now, we're going to be sculpting. So we've kind of gone over painting a little bit in the fur tutorial, but we're going to be talking about sculpting here. So we're going to just work in the Sculpting tab right here. Let's go back to the object list. But before I do, this sculpting, the reason that there's a Sculpting Layers tab right here is we can add new layers and we can make new sculpting layers in this tab. That's something I'll hopefully bring up in a future tutorial here. So we don't really need it for this quick demo, but just make a note of that. So object list, we're back under this tab. We have subdivision levels, which is again the kind of most important thing to understand about Mudbox. So we brought in the model at level 0, and level 0 it had 1079 faces, polygons to it here. So Mudbox, remember we can add a ton of detail into the Mudbox sculpt. And the way you do that is you add new subdivision levels. You're basically smoothing it over and over again. The nice thing about Mudbox though is we can make, in Maya, when you subdivide something, you're kind of stuck with that higher subdivision level. In Mudbox, when you add new subdivisions, you can move back and forth between level 0, and if I step it all the way up to level 4, I can just move back and forth between level 0 that looks like this, and then level 4 where it's got 1,000,000 polys. And there's advantages and disadvantages to working in low poly and high poly areas. So how do you add subdivisions to this? Just make sure that the object is selected. You go to Mesh, and then add new subdivision level right there. You can also press Shift and D right there. So I'll just add a new subdivision level. You can see right there, we're on level 1, which is new, and it's got 4,000 polys instead of 1,000. And you can see under here, under the horn, underneath the plus right there, we have level 0, and then level 1. And you can see right here, if we click off of it, that the subdivision count doubled right there, or not doubled, it multiplied. Yeah. So I'm bad at math, so I'm not even going to try. So here, I can press Shift and D, or go back up to Mesh, add new subdivision level. So we're now up to 17,000. I'll press Shift D. We're now on level 4, which is at 69,000. And I'll press Shift D. And now we're at 276,000. That's pretty good. And I think I can get away with one more here, so I'll press Shift and D one more time and go all the way up to level 5, and we're at 1,000,000 polys right here. So we're currently on level 5, and I can tell I'm on level 5 because when I click right here, it turns yellow. If I click on level 4, it doesn't turn yellow. And you can see there's so many faces here that it's, you know, pretty wild. So I'll press W to turn off the wireframe here. And so here on these higher subdivision levels is where I'm gonna sculpt here. But if I want to move down to a lower subdivision level, if I want to see this at a lower subdivision level, all I need to do is press page up or page down on my computer. If you're on a laptop, you can press, or a Mac laptop, you can press function and then up and down. Or you can go to mesh and then step level up and then step level down right there. So that's page up, page down right there. So I'm on level 5 right now. If I want to go to level 4, I can just click right there. I'm now on level 4. I can also press function and down and move down to level 3. So I'm now at 69,000 polys. And if I sculpt at 69,000, whoa. Let's see here. Yeah, let me just go ahead and move this all the way back up to the highest subdivision level again. So I'm just pressing function and then up. So we're at highest. You can see in parentheses it says highest right there. We're at 1,000,000. And so now let's start sculpting on this thing. So to sculpt, I'm going to show you the sculpt, the smooth, and the wax sculpting tools here. So sculpt, I double click it here. The strength is at 100, which is why when I pressed it went kind of crazy in there. So we're going to want to bring this, the slider might delay a little bit on you. Let's bring it all the way down to 3. We're working pretty small here, so this might need to be at like 1. Let's try sculpting here. So the reason that mine looks like this is the last time I was working in this program, I had a stamp turned on. So I'm going to press edit undo, and I'm going to turn that off, and we'll come back to that. So I also don't need symmetry on this right now, so I'm going to turn mirroring off because I'm just working on a horn. But if you're working on a character's face or something on a symmetrical model, just make sure that you have mirror turned on right here, and depending on which axis your character is facing. One super important note here is that I am doing all this in Mudbox using a tablet, and if you try doing this with a mouse, it's not going to work. It's to use a tablet here, I'm using an Intuos tablet right now, which is a Wacom pen, where we have a pen that looks something like this. Let's see, if I go to Wacom Desktop Center, press on Intuos Pro right here, I'm going to go to pen settings. I'll just need a second to load. So my pen looks like this, and a pen like this is kind of what you need for doing Mudbox, I think, where we have our left click right here, our right click is if we press there, and then I have it loaded up by going to this setting that we're on right now to middle click. By default, it's going to be under double click right there, or your Wacom will kind of be at this preset by default. And you want to just click on this, make this middle click. And so why do I say that? The reason is the way that you move your camera in Mudbox is exactly the same way you move your camera in Maya. You hold Option, and then if I just do a normal click, so I'm just pressing my pen down, we can rotate around the object. If I do that right click option and just drag left to right, I can zoom in and out of the object. And really important is, since I set that middle click button up, I can pan. And while you're sculpting, if you can't pan, like, good luck. You know, it's pretty tough. Like, you need all 3 of those controls right there. And so that's really important. And then the reason that the pen's really important is if you're drawing with a mouse, you're just, let me just sculpt for a second with using my trackpad. So I'm using my mouse right now. And I'm just stuck at one subdivision, or one depth level. Whenever I sculpt, every time I sculpt, it's going to kind of be at that level right there. I have 0 control over it. And you can see here, my strength is at 1. I can't even get much lower than that. And I've almost brushed all the way through my entire horn here. So if I press edit undo, and so I'm not going to change any settings at all. And I'm using my pen. Notice that this is on invert right there. Just take note of that. And so now that I'm on my pen, look, I didn't change my brush settings at all, and I have so much more control over this, right? I was making the Grand Canyon before, and now I can make the Grand Canyon if I press hard on my pen right there, press edit undo. But if I press lightly, I can get lighter brush strokes right there. So right now, you can see these brush strokes are going into the model, and that's because I have invert turned on. If I turn it off, this is the default right here. And so by default, when I brush, it goes up. So it adds by default and it subtracts when you press invert. You can also press Control on your keyboard, and that is the shortcut to get it to invert right there. I'm going to take my brush size and bring it, or my strength, way down. So let's see here. So these controls are right here. What I prefer to do rather than fiddle around with those controls and try to find my windows is I hold down spacebar. We got brush size right here, so I just click on it right there, and you can see it changing over here. But I can change my brush size right there, and no matter what tool, whatever I'm doing, as long as I have my cursor over my canvas right here, I can spacebar and change my brush size. Spacebar right here, this is the brush strength. So this dot, you can just, if you drag it down, it's going to be a really light strength. If you bring it up, it's going to be a really heavy strength right there. So I'll set it like this. And so now I can start to get some really kind of subtle marks, and I have a lot more control. Like the slider, for me at least, in the past has been, as soon as I say that, it goes crazy on me. Usually easier to control than the than over here, but I just got proved wrong by that, so shows what I know. You can also type in the number right there. These controls are pretty finicky right now, and so the reason for that is that my horn is really small. So by default, your program might look a little bit more like this, where the grid is displayed. You can see the grid, each square right here is a centimeter, and my horn is like absolutely tiny right now. And so if I want these sliders to be a little easier to control, just make sure that you can scale up your object by using this control right here, scale it up. And the more you scale it up, the more you're going to be able to control this thing. So I'm back under sculpt again, double click on sculpt so that this menu comes back up. And so now you can see brush size before at 0.7, which was huge before, is pretty small. And the strength, I bet I can get away with more here now. So I'm gonna bring the strength up to all the way up to 1.6, you know, I'm getting really ambitious here. But you can see right now that I'm having a lot easier time controlling this at this point. So keep in mind that I'm working with a million polys right here, so I'm able to get a lot of detail in my sculpt. And so why would you ever want to work in a lower subdivision level? Because you're getting all this nice detail here. And so the reason that you might want to shift this down to a lower subdivision level is, let's say that you want to use the smooth tool. The smooth tool is this tool right here, and you can always get it just by pressing shift. That's a shortcut. So no matter what tool you're on, sculpting tool, if you hold shift, it'll smooth. And so let's do this area right here. This is a bit of a fall off, and if I press shift right now, it's doing something, but it's not doing much. I'll press edit, undo. So you can see it did do something, but not a lot. And so if you want your smooth to do more, I can just press function and down, or page down, or go to mesh and then step level down. And so we're now, I might have stepped level up by mistake there. So I'll just press function down. So I stepped it down to, where are we? We're on level 4 now. And I'll step it down one more. So function down one more time. We're at level 3. So you can see some of that detail starting to break up. So that's bad. But if I hold shift and I do smooth, you can see that we're getting a lot more traction with it. So if things are looking a little too lumpy and you need to smooth them out, you might need to just take your subdivision level and move it down for a minute here. So I'm just going to press function and then up a couple of times and bring it back to its highest here. So that's the sculpt tool and the smooth tool right there. So the wax tool is a lot like the clay buildup tool in ZBrush, and it's very similar to the brush tool, but it's just like it's a little more organic. It's more of a gradual buildup right there, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. Let's give it a little more strength so we can kind of see what it's doing here. So you can kind of build up shapes. So if you're building up muscle structure, if you think about like muscle on like an anatomy model, you know, when you look at muscle, it's like made of like a lot of little strings like this, and so you can build up form kind of gradually using the wax buildup tool right there. And it's kind of got some nice properties to it. So I can just fill this in a little bit. And let's wrap this up here. So this is our sculpt right there. So you can see we added a lot of new detail into this thing. And so let's take this, and I'm going to save it. So file, save scene as, and I'm going to call this version C because I did a quick run through. And okay, so I'm going to show you the process now where we take this complicated model and we project it onto the level 0 version of the model. So one thing first is you have two options. We can either export this new model at level 0 back into Maya. And the reason I might want to do that is when I sculpted, I probably added some new shape to this thing, right? The shape, the overall shape has changed a little bit. And or we can just try to take the normal map and project it onto this model right here. But you can see that just like the basic shape, even if I brought this down to level 0, would have changed. So what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to eventually export this model at level 0 back into Maya and kind of get rid of that original horn shape right there that's in Maya right there. And then I'm also going to export the normal map here. So I'm going to step the level down a bunch. So I'm going to press function and then down. Step this thing all the way back down to level 0 right here. And you can tell it's at level 0 because when I click on level 0, it turns yellow right there. And just click off of it right there. Press W, and you can see here that the topology's changed a little bit, but that's fine. And I'll press W again. Oh shoot. So, darn it. Two really important things I forgot to mention, and I'll go over the stamp tool in future tutorials. So I'll go over that in more detail here. You know what? Forget it. I'll go ahead and show it. Sorry. But the other thing I forgot to show is two really important shortcuts here. So we have A, which focuses the camera on the object, and when you press A, when you rotate it around, it stays on the model, which is nice until you pan it again. And so that helps if you're like working on a detail and you're working and then you want to see the whole thing, just press A and you can see it all. If you want to zoom in on the model, you can press F, and F zooms in on the model relative to how big your brush size is. So if I'm on the sculpt tool, the brush size looks like that, and I'm going to hover it over the tip of the horn and press F. You see it focuses right in on the end of the horn, and I'll press A to punch back out again. So now I'm going to take my brush size, make it larger, hold it in the same spot, press F, and you see it barely zooms in at all because the brush size is so big there. So I'll get it a little smaller, press F again, now it's zooming in. Make the brush size a little smaller again, press F, it zooms in more. So F and A, really helpful shortcuts here. So I'm always pressing Option, F and A as I'm working here, and then sometimes W to see the wireframe. So those are important shortcuts I want to show. Additionally, I meant to show this before. I want to show the stamp control real quick. So I'll press function and step this all the way back up to the highest subdivision level again. So I was showing the sculpt, the smooth, and the wax tool. And so with the standard sculpt tool, what the stamp tool can be good for, or sorry, the stamp component can be good for, is adding some more kind of texture and detail into this thing. So with the sculpt tool, you know, when I was working before, I'm sculpting and it looks like that. And if I add a stamp on it, and you can click right here to make your own custom stamps and put it on. There's some presets in here that we can use as well. Let's look at this one. So I'm going to click on this kind of noise stamp right here, and it adds the stamp onto my standard brush. And so when I sculpt now, let me bring my strength up a little bit. You can see right there that the sculpt has that added texture applied to it. So if you want your horn or something like that just to have a little bit of added texture added to it, like particularly like skin tone, things like that, this can also be really good for height maps down the road. So you can just get like a little more added detail in there. So you have these options right here. You can click right here and then add your own stamp. And it'll show up down here, and you can just keep adding on to them. And you can turn off and on the stamp. It's under the brush tool menu right here, and it's just this check mark right here. And I'll zoom around a little bit and add this in there. And yeah, so that's just kind of a basic kind of introduction to the stamp tool. I wanted to make sure I showed that here. So again, I'm going to save. And going back to my original plan, right, I'm going to export this model back at level 0 into Maya. And then I'm going to do a normal map of this detail sculpt that I've made right here and project it onto level 0. So let's export the model out back into Maya. So I'm going to press function and then page down all the way to the bottom. So if I press function and down on a Mac, I go all the way back down to level 0, press W, you can see the wireframe right there. And I'm going to send this back to Maya. So I'm just going to make sure that this model is selected, go File, sorry, let me select that, File, send to Maya, and you know what, I'm going to send this as a new scene. So I'm going to go File, Send Selected as a new scene. You could also update your current scene. So that just kind of depends on your preference right there. So I'm going to send this as a new scene in Maya. Not even going to bother saving that old version of Maya. And let's see. There we go. Didn't see it at first. The horn came in huge. So we can see our horn came in right there. And you can see that those changes I had made to the model and the sculpt are showing up right there. But again, this is a very low poly version of it, right, that we're seeing right there. So we have our model. Now let's get our normal map. So I'll press function and then up and page all the way back up to my high subdivision level. Remember, I can also go to mesh and then step level up right there to do that same thing. But just pressing the page up is a much faster way to do it. And so we have this model, and I want to export this detail onto this model right here in Maya. So I have it on the highest subdivision level. I'm going to make sure that it's selected right there, and it'll turn yellow. And here, what I'm going to do is go to UVs and Maps, Extract Texture Map, and then New Operation right there. So UVs and Maps, Extract Texture Maps, and then New Operation. Click on that. And I'm going to choose Normal Map. That's what I want. And then here, this menu comes up, and there's a few things we need to double check. So this is already looking pretty good. Make sure that your method is on subdivision right here. There's raycasting, but we want subdivision. Right here, we have our target model, and it's kind of illustrated at the top here. So the target model is the model waiting for us back in Maya, like the low poly version. Then our source model is this detailed, wrinkly version that we're working on. And then this is the normal map. This is what a normal map looks like. And notice that a normal map is purple and has some different colors to it. And so it's going to take this detail and put it onto that map right there. So that's kind of the set. By default, it might just come in looking like this, like it did for me, but you might need to change it to look like this for yours. So just make sure that's the lowest subdivision level, that's the highest subdivision level. Make sure that's on subdivision. Moving down, image properties. By default, it's going to be 1024 by 1024. That's way too low. So you're going to want this to be 4K for your model here. And it just kind of depends on your model, right? If this is the normal map for like one tooth or something like that, then maybe 1024 by 1024 is good. But if it's like a model like this that's going to be heavily featured, you're going to want 4K. And if you're doing like the whole body of a character and you have a powerful computer, you might want to consider 8K. But 4K is pretty much always going to be fine. So just change that to 4K. And then down here, we have compatibility. That's fine. Make sure that coordinate space is tangent. That's the default, so that should be where it is. Just make a mental note of tangent because we're going to need to change something in Maya to be tangent right there. So default is good right there. Moving down, this is the less important thing to change. And so most of the time when you're exporting maps in Maya, it doesn't really matter what file type you use, like a PSD, JPEG, TIFF, they all work most of the time. This time it does matter though, because up here we're exporting a normal map right here, And depending on the color of like that fuchsia right there, if that color is a little wrong in Maya, it's going to make it go crazy on us. So the normal map is like the one time where this really matters. So I'm going to click on this triple dot right here. And I'm going to call this normal horn. Okay. And right here is where I'm going to change the file type. And so this needs to not be a PNG 8-bit, and it needs to be a TIFF 16-bit floating right there. So TIFF 16-bit floating, and then press save. And then now all we need to do is press extract and just fingers crossed that this works. Sometimes this fails. Let's see. Extract. And I'll need to think for a second. That's normal. Since my model had a million polys on it, whew, okay, it had to think for a minute. And so finish successfully. Hopefully you get that message. And then close. So on my computer here, what we just exported was this file right here. And so you can see, you remember where my UVs were when we pulled up the UVs, you can see that information of the sculpt. And so we're going to take that sculpting information and then put it onto our model here. So we're going to go back into Maya. We got our horn here, and we're going to be doing some work in the hypershade. So right now, if we're going to kind of be doing normal maps and then rendering so we can see what's going on here. So if I press Arnold and render right now, it's going to be black because there's no lights in the scene. So let me go to Arnold, lights. I'm going to just build the most basic kind of light. I only use this light typically in certain situations, and sometimes I use this light if I just need a quick preview, right? So for my finished model, I want to use like a sky dome light and do something more advanced that's coming up in the next tutorial. But just to preview things, I'm going to do the physical sky. And now when I go Arnold render, we can see something, right? It's just giving us a very basic render of our scene here. So next up, so physical sky created. Next up, we're going to go right here, which is our hypershade. It looks like a little olive. So we're going to click on the hypershade. So the way the hypershade works is these are where you add new materials, new colors, all that stuff into your scene. And so this menu right here is where we add new materials. This window right here are materials that are currently loaded into the scene. And you can see here we can click on these different things. And so the light, I just made a physical sky right there. So that shows up. These are the materials that are already in. And this is where the node network is going to show up. If any of y'all find node networks confusing or anything like that, it's I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and hopefully it won't be too bad right here. The idea is actually pretty simple when you get down to the basics of it here. And then finally on the right here, we have the properties editor, which is a lot like the attribute editor. And it just applies to the attributes of whatever material you have currently selected. So I need to use a specific material here. So I'm going to go to Arnold, Shader, click on where it says Shader right there. Go down to AI Standard Surface, and it should have a little A on the top right of it. So AI Standard Surface, this is pretty much by far the best material in Maya, and you can use it to make metals, plastics, any kind of material. You can get it with this shader right here. And definitely want it for this technique I'm showing today. So we have our node network showing up right there. This is our main material. We need to name it because you can see up here, it just says AI standard. And imagine building up your scene, you're going to end up with a bunch of these just A's that say AI standard. And so if you don't name this is going to get confusing in about, on your third object, right? So just right click and go down to rename right there by selecting it. You can also just with this selected, change the name right here. Just drag and select right there. And I'll call this horn. You can see right there, it updated right there. So now our material is called horn. And let's go ahead and apply this material onto our object before we start messing with it. So I'm going to click on the object in object mode. Then I'm going to hover my cursor over where it says horn right here. And then just hold down right click and then assign material to selection. And then now that new material will load on. So our material's on. It's just like a plasticky material right now. And we're going to want to add our normal map on now. So the normal map, we're going to start going into this node thing here. And so there's just a few steps. And so if you just follow the steps, this will work for you here. So we've got our main node. And so right here, you can see this node is where you kind of, if you have maps for like the base color, you can kind of plug it into there. For the specularity, you can paint things in. If you want to add, like, paint where things are going to be shiny and where they're not. And down here under normal camera, that's where we're going to plug in our normal map. So we're going to click on this node right here, then look over in the properties editor to the right, and then just drag down till you see the geometry tab. So again, we're on this node right here. On the properties editor, drag down to the geometry tab. And where it says bump mapping right here, to the right of it, we got the checkerboard box, which is where you load in a file. So we want to load in our own file for the bump map. So I'm going to, and I know it says bump map. We're going to, don't worry about that being the wrong name. We're going to fix that. So just click on this checkerboard box right there, and then click where it says file. And you can see here that our node network changed. And so you can see we have that main node that we were working on before, and then we have this node right here, which is kind of the attributes of the normal map that we're going to be doing. And then this node right here indicates the file that we just pumped out of Mudbox there. So click on this node right here to start things off. And with this node selected, the first thing we need to do, this is step one, is we need to change it from bump map down to tangent space normal map right here. To tangent space normal is right there. And so now that's going to help a lot. That's like the most important thing to change. Right here, bump depth is going to be the strength of the normal map. By default, it's going to be 1. I'm going to put this at 2 just so that things are nice and exaggerated when they come in for the purposes of the demo. 1's usually good. You know, maybe 1.5. So that's this node right here. So all you need to worry about are those two things, tangent space normals. And then if you want the bump depth to be stronger, you can either raise it or lower it there. So now, and also with this node view, I'm moving my camera around just by holding Option the same way as I normally would in like the orthographic view here. So I'm middle clicking here to kind of get this this pan to work. You can also press F at any point to zoom in on a node and then zoom out right here. So anyway, sorry, got a little distracted there. So we did this node, right? Tangent space 1.5. We're going to move on to the file node right here. So we're going to click on that. And we're going to click on image name, where the folder we're going to load in our file. So just click on that folder. And then what did I name this thing? I think it's normal horn B version 1. And press open. And so now our normal map is loaded in, but there's a couple more things we need to do. First off is the color space. By default in Maya is set at sRGB, which is the wrong color space for this particular normal map. So you're going to want to click on this arrow and then drag down to where it says raw right there. And so it said sRGB before, and we want this to say raw right there. And again, this is all happening on this node right here. So that's almost everything. This last one's really dumb and annoys me, but it's something we have to do, because if we were to render this right now, it would look right, but the areas of the normal map that are raised would appear to be lowered, and it would just be reverse. So up would be down, down would be up if we were to render it right now. And so to fix that, the last thing we need to do is I'm just going to minimize the hypershade. And annoyingly, we have to go through some steps to find this, so just follow along here. So I'm going to select my horn in objects mode, or my object, look for the attribute editor, and then go to the last tab under the attribute editor, the rightmost tab right there, and that's going to be like the material. And it'll look like this, and you're going to want to scrub down to where it says geometry, and then click on that. And under geometry, it says bump mapping right here. So where it says bump mapping, right click and go to bump, just the first option. Just so where it says bump mapping, right click where it says bump mapping and go to the first option. And that brings us to this menu, and it'll probably look like this for you right here. And under this Arnold tab right here, open that up. So under Arnold, we have these two checked, and we need to uncheck them in order for this to appear correctly. So just uncheck both of those, and we should be good to go here. So let me save this real quick just in case I don't want this to crash during the render. So horn 1, sure. And remember, my lighting scheme for this isn't like the best thing here, so my render will probably, you know, just kind of look so-so here, but we'll see. So Arnold render, and this will probably need a second to think about it, and here we go. So looking at this, we have all the detail of my, and again, this light is like a little like diffuse. Hopefully you can kind of see this. Okay, I'll let this settle for a second. But you can see right here on the right, my model is like, what was it again? It was like 1,000 polys or something like that, and we get all this detail in there. And notice that this detail is kind of raised up. I set my bump value at 1.5. So if I set it at 1, it would be a little more subtle right here. And if I set it at like 3, these would be a lot more exaggerated right here. And you can get a lot of detail onto your model using normal maps here. Particularly if I were to put the right lighting on it, you can even start to see here in this render some of that, whatchamacallit, that stamp that I was doing on the model right there. So if I want to change the bump value on this, I can just go back to the hypershade. So I'm going to open up my hypershade again. And the bump value, I believe, is on this node right here. So if we're looking at our node network, it's this one right here. Then, oh, I keep saying bump value. I meant to say bump depth. So if I change that to 1, we'll see that this will kind of need to update for a second. But it'll get like a little more subtle in there. And let's just get crazy with it. I'll change the bump value to 4. Or sorry, the bump depth. I keep saying the wrong thing. And let me just go to Arnold render again. It's going to need a second to load. You can see it's thinking about it right here. Okay. And so the bump value is just, it's going to be pretty gradual, you know, like it's not, the difference between 4 and 1 is not going to be like some massive thing right here. But yeah, so you can see here that the normal map is functional and we're able to get this amount of detail onto that model right there.